Welcome to the second season of the WUDC Distinguished Lecture Series. This season revolves around effective altruism, and the episodes are organized in coordination with the Effective Altruism Debate Championship. Today, our speaker is Karolina Sarek. Karolina is the co-founder and director of research at Charity Entrepreneurship. There, she creates a research agenda and processes and leads the research team, aiming to find and compare the most evidence-based, cost-effective, and neglected interventions in multiple cause areas. She also serves as a fund manager for the EA Animal Welfare Fund and as a board member and consultant for various non-profits and think tanks. Before Charity Entrepreneurship, she co-founded an organization to improve the impact of non-profits and social enterprises, worked on measurements and evaluation, and was a researcher for IBM and the Jagiellonian University. At the age of 22, she became a university teaching fellow, lecturing at JU's Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Science. Karolina's talk is titled Effective for Animals, and it is centered on issues of animal welfare. We're excited to have Karolina on board, and for similar content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hi, I'm Karolina Sarek, and today I'll be speaking about animal welfare and effective animal advocacy. But before that, I would like to take a step back. If you follow the trend lines, you would discover that our lives have become better. We live longer, healthier, safer, happier, and more peacefully and prosperous than we've ever been. As Steven Pinker argues is Enlightenment Now, such progress is an outcome of a coherent and inspiring value system that many of us embrace without even realizing it. This trend can be observable worldwide and in all domains of life. Let's just take a look at health. Inequality of years of life between people in the same country is decreasing, which means that people not only live longer, but also the gap between the luckiest and unluckiest one is decreasing. Similarly, global burden of disease is decreasing in all age groups. Everyone from an infant to an elderly is getting healthier. Child mortality on all income levels is decreasing as well. This trend is changing more dramatically for those born in low and low middle income countries. Global burden of disease from communicable, maternal, and neonatal and nutritional disease is decreasing, which means that we are getting healthier and we all have problems are going down instead of just a couple of selected ones. We live happier, healthier, longer lives worldwide. And yet, there's one group of sentient beings for whom the world looks differently. Farmed animals. And it's getting worse. Intelligent animals like cows, pigs, and hens are confined in cages, deprived of ability to satisfy their fundamental needs. The number of animals suffering in factory farms globally has more than doubled in the last 2 decades alone. Factory farms today are confining approximately 110 billion of animals at any given time. This increase has been swamped by the 5-time rise in farmed birds, 47-time rise in farmed fish, and current projections suggest that this alarming growth is not going to slow down anytime soon, with estimates that factory farms a decade from now will confine 4.2 billion more land animals and 18.5 billion more fish than they do today. This number is overwhelming and hard to imagine, but think that at a given point in time, there's more factory farm animals confined in cages than there were humans alive on the planet in all human history. So today I will be speaking about animal welfare. I will start with what is it? I will describe it on the example of egg-laying hens, broiler chickens, and fish. But then I will move on to the brighter side of things. What you can do to improve their condition and improve their welfare, and what already has been accomplished in the last decade. So what is animal welfare? Many people have invented criteria for measuring quality of life in animals, usually within the context of farm animals. I will focus on the first two, since they're most commonly used and most comprehensible. So 5 freedoms and the 5 domains model. One of the earliest attempts was the 5 freedom created by the Farm Animal Welfare Council in Great Britain in the 1970s. The 5 freedoms are a cornerstone of British governmental and industry policy that have been internationally influential. The freedoms are as follows: freedom from hunger and thirst, which means that animals should have access to water and diet to maintain health and vigor. Freedom from discomfort. That will mean providing an appropriate environment according to given species needs. And freedom from pain, injury, and disease, which will mean preventing and rapidly diagnosing and treating any disease that occurs in any individual. freedom to express normal behavior by providing sufficient space, appropriate facilities, and appropriate company of animals on your account if they need that. And freedom from fear and distress by ensuring conditions and treatment which avoid mental suffering. Later developed 5 domain models frames the criteria not as freedom animals ought to possess, but as potential areas of welfare compromised. This way, interventions are graded based on their effects on each domain. And you can see that domains are similarly constructed as the 5 freedoms. So we have first, hunger, malnutrition, environmental challenges, disease, injury, functional impairments, behavioral and interactive restrictions, and lastly, anxiety, fear, pain, and distress. This model has several advantages for the purpose of assessing welfare, including being systematic, comprehensive, versatile, and easy to incorporate new information about intensity and duration of given welfare area that is compromised. It permits users to rank interventions based on their welfare impact, to identify areas of uncertainty, and to prioritize which mitigation strategies have the largest benefit. The 5 domains explicitly separate physical and affective impact, while encouraging users to consider multiple kinds of affective impacts at the same time. But it has many limitations as well that had to be overcome to make this model relevant for our purposes. So my team and I created our own model based on 5 domains. We call it welfare points. It's quite similar to 5 domains in many areas. For example, it looks at very similar domains. So we again have disease, injury, malnutrition, first hunger, anxiety, fear, pain, distress, and so on and so forth. But on top of that, we added a couple of criteria to make the measure even more robust. Like, for example, index of biological markers of happiness, where we also independently look at biological indicators of a given welfare state. So for example, we might look at cortisol level to measure the level of the state of their arousal that animals currently in. And with contextual information, we may observe that this is clearly caused by, for example, a given injury. And this will enable us to objectively and in a very measurable way estimate the degree of that. Or for example, we added a criteria that's called so-called human preference from behind the veil of ignorance. So the argument from behind the veil of ignorance in the original application was a thought experiment to imagine that if you were to be born in any country on the planet, would you have any preferences in which country would it be? And then when you're evaluating what change or policy or what you want to introduce in the world, you want to introduce one that if you didn't know where you will be born, you'll be happy to be born in any of the places and in any of the conditions. That basically ensures that we're always thinking about interests of all people involved, not only our interests or interests of our people closest to us. Similarly here, we try to take overall look at animal welfare from behind veil of ignorance. So if I didn't know if I was to be born as human or as chicken or a wild chimp, would I have any preference for the species I was going to be whatsoever? And obviously right now I love being humans, and obviously we achieve welfare that very often is completely not available to all the factory of our animals. So it is obvious then when I overall assess the welfare, I can see that the welfare of a factory of animals is way lower than many of the other species, including us. So we created a system that enables us to rate every animal on every criteria, on every domain, and then present the overall welfare on a scale from minus 100, which means like the worst welfare possible, to positive 100, which is like the best welfare possible. And you can see that all factory farmed animals are all the time on the negative side of welfare, which means that their life might not be even worth living because the suffering is so enormous. So this system enables us to prioritize between different species, which should be the subject of our interventions and improve which animals need the biggest improvement in welfare compared to kind of the baseline state. So now that we created this system, we applied it to 18 different animals to try and determine the animal whose lives seem to worse and encourage to target those animals with interventions. We call them priority animals. Each animal have been an object of extensive research. We conducted multiple literature reviews. We consulted experts in welfare biology, as well as visited some of farms to, on our own eyes, see what the conditions are. And then both my team and external reviewers evaluated their state on the scale that we are using, and determine which animals need our most attention. So taking the average score of all reviewers and numbers of animals farmed, the probability of sentience, we made 5 priority farm animals, which are hens, turkeys, broilers, fish, and crustaceans. With these projections, it's particularly important to highlight the plight of farmed birds, in particular chickens, and farmed fish, the largest group of animals affected by the current practices. So what does it look like in practice? First, I will highlight the plight of layer hens. Since 80 to 90% of the world's egg-laying hens are confined within battery cages for their entire life. Each battery cage generally houses up to 10 birds. The average space allowed per bird in a typical battery cage is less than the size of A4 sheet paper, and the height is just enough to allow hens to stand, giving this bird no room to stretch, flap their wings, or preen. It is hard to imagine a more intense form of chronic suffering that you could inflict on an animal. We know from preferences studies that these birds, given the chance to get to a nesting box, will push through a very heavy cage doors with the same force as they would to get to food after being starved for 24 hours. This proves that this intense degree of behavioral deprivation inflicted on these animals is a serious welfare concern, and is the lived reality of the majority of those animals. The intense confinement and behavioral deprivation of the battery cage farming system isn't the only welfare concern faced by those birds. The overwhelming egg demands on commercial hens depletes the hen stores of calcium and can result in higher level of osteoporosis and bone breakages and fractures. The restricted movement of these hens' battery cages can also be exaggerated by the issues of osteoporosis. Injured birds are often left to die from these deficiencies, as several tiers of crowded cages make inspection difficult, and therefore the domain of injury that will require animal to be treated is impossible. Moreover, hens often lose a large portion of the feathers due to damage from the sides of the cage and pecking from other hens who are stressed from being so closely packed together. To prevent feather pecking, chicks, instead of improving the conditions, for example, having less birds in cages or removing the cages altogether, chicks often have parts of their beaks cut off without anesthesia. Next, I will highlight the plight of broiler chickens. These are chickens raised for meat. There are 16 billion alive broilers at any point in time, and more than 60 billion slaughtered a year. As you can see from the photo, the issue faced by broilers is not those that are faced by egg-laying hens. It's not the confinement that is standing in the way of their welfare, but the way they've been bred in the first place. That intensely reared chickens have been bred over the last few decades to grow very quickly, reaching so-called slaughter weight at just 6 weeks old. But there are huge welfare costs to this increased growth rate. They spend much of their time lying down because their legs are not strong enough to support their heavy body weight, and many of them suffer from painful leg disorders. Alongside these leg disorders, their rapid growth also put a strain on their hearts and lungs. They suffer from fatigue and do not have always energy to move around. Fast-growing pigs spends most of their time and less of the time performing natural behaviors such as walking, pecking, scratching the litter, and perching, and more time just sitting and eating compared to the slower breeds. Studies have been done on broiler chickens with these leg problems. One group of chickens had leg problems. Other group of chickens didn't have any particular problems because they were slower growing breeds. And to those group of chickens, they were offered two type of feed. One feed was just like a regular feed, and the other one was fortified with painkillers. And then we can observe how the chickens behave, and is there any preference that they have for one feed or the other. We could observe that chickens with leg problems always chose the feet fortified with painkillers, compared to, for example, the chickens that didn't have leg problems, that didn't have any particular preferences for one feet or the other. That shows or illustrates or proves that the leg problem is a chronic condition. It's a chronic pain that is inflicted on those animals. However, there are also similarities between the plight of broiler chickens and layers too. So there are overcrowding and barren environments. Overcrowding is a serious issue, as tens of thousands of birds can be housed in a single shed. At least in the European Union, the legal requirement is that broilers are housed with the equivalent of around 19 birds per square meter, depending on the weight at slaughter. This means that each bird has less floor space than the size of A4 sheet of paper. These chickens have very little space for exercise and are disturbed or thrown over when they are by the other chickens. As they grow, they have less and less space to move and find it more difficult to reach food and drinking water if they're lame. Generally, broiler sheds are barren except for water, food, and point with no natural light. There's litter on the floor to absorb droppings, but this is not cleaned up until the chickens have been removed from the shed for slaughter. The air can become highly polluted with ammonia from the droppings, and this can damage the chicken's eyes and respiratory system and cause painful burns on their legs, chest, and feet. So is the situation better for fish? Well, to start with, the estimated number of fish farmed is between 75 billion and 140 billion farmed fish confined in fish farm globally. This estimate is so wide for fish because FAO only reports tonnage data instead of like number of individuals being kept in the systems. The estimate is there's this other estimates that are showing that there's another 1 to 2 trillion wild-caught fish who are slaughtered globally. I will focus on farmed fish today for two main reasons. First, humans have control over their whole life rather than just the end of their life with the capture and slaughter of wild fish, making it easier and more tractable to improve their welfare. Secondly, for the first time in humans' history, most fish by tonnage comes from aquaculture rather than being wild caught. And this is a trend expected to continue, with fish farming expanding rapidly. So the difficulty about gaining insight and knowledge about the welfare of fish, and also just gaining momentum in improving their welfare, is that we cannot see their suffering. We can visit a fish farm, like the farm picture here, and not see a single fish. We don't know what these fish are experiencing beneath the surface. We cannot see the fish struggling to breathe from poor water quality. We cannot see the overcrowding leading to increased injury rates and increased aggression. And we cannot see the frustrated preferences of fish unable to express their natural behavior, such as salmon, who are migratory species that is unable to migrate in their confinement. We cannot also see widespread disease and parasites. But somewhere where the suffering of fish is particularly silent is their slaughter. 90% of farmed fish globally are not stunned prior to slaughter, which means that they are alive at the moment of their painful death. Instead, slaughter naturally takes place via oxygen deprivation, which research suggests that fish can take anywhere from 25 to 150 minutes to become completely insensible. We can just imagine what fish is experiencing while it struggles to grasp an air and eventually die from suffocation. With as much evidence that fish are sentient as there is for chickens, commercial aquaculture is a grossly neglected issue with a wealth of horrific welfare problems. So why I'm talking about it? Lessons from evolutionary psychology, biology, and philosophy can tell us that altruism began as a genetically based drive to protect our kin and community members, but has developed into more consciously chosen ethics with an expanding circle of moral concern. It is our capacity for reasoning that makes moral progress possible. Our moral circle describes who we think is worth our moral concern and should be included in our moral considerations. Our moral circles have been expanding throughout history. Originally, the circle would have been self, family, and tribe, But over time, it grew to encompass all other humans, as it's exemplified by civil rights, gay rights, and the LGBTQ movement, and concern about global health over health and well-being of people in our country. With overwhelming evidence for animal sentience and horrific conditions they live in, it is time to include welfare of animals in our silk of more concern. So what you can do? The first option is to support organization financially. But if this is not an option, or you want to do more, you can also check if you can take a career path that will enable you to not only live happy life, but also at the same time help others. If this is not possible, you can think about other things, other ways you can spend your time and expertise. And lastly, if you have access and influence that will enable you to promote some of the concerns about animal welfare. So to start with the obvious one, which is supporting animal welfare organizations financially. Currently, we might think that if the scale of the problem is so big, there will surely be a lot of resources spent to help those animals. This is an infographic from animal charity evaluators that nicely illustrates this disparity between the largest form of suffering and where funding is currently going. So on the left side, you can see all domesticated land animals used and killed by humans in the United States. You can see that 99.6% are farmed land animals. The rest is animals in shelter, animals for clothing, and animals in laboratories. But if you look on the right side, you'll see where the donations actually goes. And you can see that majority of that goes to animals in shelter, like cats and dogs. Big part of that goes to some other categories, and farm animals only receive 0.8% of donations spent on all animal organizations. This is really illustrating that this number together, putting this number together and the suffering that I have just highlighted, suggests that typical donor and volunteer should shift their focus and concentrate their effort on preventing the suffering of as many farm factory animals as possible. And many of us are blessed with the resources to do just that. But if you don't know exactly where to donate, there's an easy way to just outsource your donation. You can outsource it to me and my colleagues. If you donate to Effective Altruism Animal Welfare Fund, I will allocate your funds based on where I think a marginal dollar can best be used to reduce animal suffering. You can also outsource your giving to animal charity evaluators, organization that evaluates animal organizations worldwide to make sure that your dollar has the biggest impact for animals. You can donate to its recommended charity fund. That is a great first step. 75% of their funds will be split between 8 top charities, of which all I highly, highly recommend. And based on their ACE perception of their room for more funding, and 25 will go toward standout charities, which majority I really, really highly view. But if giving is not an option, or you want to do more, you can also think about how you can help with your career. Joining an effective farm animal advocacy group might be the single best thing you can do to help farm animals. These groups are always looking for talented campaigners and organizers, managers and fundraisers, investigators and lawyers, and many other roles. If you're ready for a group, thank you. If you're unsure how best to put your talent to use, I encourage you to contact animal advocacy careers who offer free coaching to help you do the most good with your career. But even if you can't work full-time in the movement, there's plenty you can do. You can sign up for Mercy for Animals, Hand Heroes, or the Humane League's Fast Action Network to receive daily activism tasks. You can attend meetups of your local Effective Altruist group, or you can build the skills to make a greater difference for farm animals in the future. And lastly, you can help with your access and influence. If you donate to political campaigns, tell policymakers that you do care about factory farm animals and you want their welfare to be improved. If you have a social media following, share investigations and campaign alerts. And if you know anyone with big influence, any influential people, tell them that you care about factory farming and you care about animal welfare. Lastly, I think that starting new charities to help those priority animals is very important, given the number of animals involved in animal agriculture and the magnitude of their suffering, as is highlighted at the beginning of my presentation. Given that, my team and I conducted research in a couple of areas to make best charity recommendations for new charities. We first looked into priority animals, that's already mentioned, and for example, came to the consideration that fish should be animals that are prioritized by new organizations. Then we conducted country reports. We evaluated around 20 countries in terms of their scale of the production, current welfare standards, and how tractable it is to make change. And we selected India as one promising country to work in. And lastly, we look at and ask what kind of area of welfare will bring the best results, will bring the most, increase the welfare of animals to the greatest degree compared to other improvements. And we selected that improving environmental conditions, specifically improving water quality for fish, was the best way to increase the welfare. Putting it all together, we recommended Fish Welfare Initiative, organization that works in India for fish, improving their water quality. They've been existing for a year now and already helped many, many fish. So there's opportunities for impact in animal welfare that could be best utilized by new organizations rather than existing organizations. That's why I think this is one of the best ways you can have an impact if you have entrepreneurial spirit. So you might think that with such a big problem is not tractable, but we can look closer. The farm animal advocacy movement has achieved more progress over the last decade than it did in the entire prior century. Because of people like you, we were able to, for example, win major campaigns for cage-free. For example, over 1,000 corporations pledged to go completely cage-free, which means that they removed one of the biggest obstacles for animal welfare for egg-laying hens. 18 out of 20 world's largest food retailers already committed to cage-free systems. And you can see that this commitment is not only centralized in Europe, it's spreading worldwide in North America, South America, Baltics, Oceania, Asia, and so on. But this is not the only win. We also have major wins with plant-based meat, given that including more plants in our diets, we can reduce a number of animals that are born in those horrific conditions. We can advocate for plant-based meat. And we can see already that 17 out of 20 largest food and beverage companies sell plant-based meats and milks, which is fantastic progress because it wasn't available 10 years ago. Next step is, of course, legislative and litigation wins. In Europe, we dropped battery cages. We also banned inhumane slaughter. And there are animal welfare ballots reforms happening in US all the time. Or new rules in livestock are introduced in India. We also achieved many other corporate wins, like getting more and more commitments to completely eliminate crates for pregnant sows, or improve welfare of broiler chickens, potentially reducing suffering of 50 million animals a year. The next big win in years, attention to fish. Investigation on the fish farms have been covered in news like Washington Post or Guardian, and Tesco and Sainsbury already introduced fish welfare policies, and we hope for that to spread to other chains as well. New national fish welfare codes are introduced in countries like Canada and Netherlands, and there are organizations entirely focusing on fish, like our Fish Welfare Initiative that I already mentioned, or Aquatic Life Institute. But this is not the end. We are growing meat. We are growing meat that tastes like meat from animal, that has the same texture and tissue like the meat produced from animals. But this time, it's produced without animal suffering at all. It's grown in lab. And there are startups racing to bring the first grown meat to market. And then there's raising awareness. Around 200 factory farms are exposed in undercover investigations. 97 documentaries published, like for example, The Game Changers that are really recommended as on Netflix, and 100 highly paid celebrities are advocating for veganism. We can also see global policy and finances, that the change is happening there. World Animal Health Organization, it's a collaboration of 182 nations endorsing improvements to animal welfare standards. We can also see it's from World Bank's Good Practices note on animal welfare. We are also building stronger movement. We are more professional, better organized, focused on large-scale changes, more data-driven, and we aim for global change. As we can see, for example, from growing interest in work in China and the progress that's able to make there. Like, for example, human slaughter rules introduced for chickens. And there are multiple endorsements for animal welfare in the government. The progress that happened there is a major step for animal welfare, given how many animals are farmed there. So as I said, circle of more concern never expands in self-executing manner. It only expands because of the will we have and actions we take. Every small action matters. So donate to farm animal welfare organizations, spend your time volunteering on, or tell policymakers and leaders of corporations that you care. Because there's no better time than today to start following all the other trends and improve welfare for animals. Thank you.